technically pushing forward AI could create, something very dangerous. That's at the level I'm working at least, I will not be the one directly causing that. Ironically, that the ultimate goal of humanity is to recreate mom. Like how can you control something that's more capable and more intelligent than you and has control of your healthcare and your military? At least in my worldview, I think a lot of the people in power maybe do not have the best motivations and do not have the best, maybe the best outlook for the people who are putting them in those positions of power.
The last emergency we got was a person who tried to kill herself after 20 years of being an alcoholic and apparently.
Well, I want to start out by saying that all people have a use. All people are valuable.
Do you think there will be a use for most humans at the end of our lifetimes?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, to be honest, what I think is most likely is that the government does not handle this well. I'd say the most interesting classes I took was 4510, Automata and Complexity Theory, where you learn about Turing machines, kind of basically the core foundation of computer science and what different mathematicians were thinking of around that time in history, which I argue basically everyone should take that class because it's like the most computer science-y class you can possibly take, where you're actually learning like what in theory is a computer and what can it do and what can it not do. And then lastly, my most difficult class is the one I'm currently taking, which is 6550, Design and Analysis of Algorithms. And it's just a very technical, high-dimensional convex geometry course with like log concave densities, and it goes pretty hard. It gets pretty intense.
Fun. About the Turing topic, have you seen this one meme where it's like, oh, computer, say I am alive. The computer says I am alive. Oh my lord, it said I am alive. Like, is that something that kind of comes up in that we feel like because we want to beat the Turing test, we just specifically train the computer to beat the test instead of actually being human?
Yes, that's definitely a thing. That sounds like a good meme. One of the things I learned in Automata and Complexity is that the Turing test was beaten long ago, like I think early 2000s, but it was not a very sophisticated like AI model. It was just a really, really big chain of like if-else statements that would dictate what the machine said. And that was smart enough to convince a human that it was real and that the real human was not real, and so it beat the Turing test. So arguably the Turing test is just not that hard. So I'd say good joke. That's funny.
Good. Well, welcome to our second episode of our rerun of the Great Conversations podcast. Gryphon, thank you for coming today. Who are you?
I am an AI researcher at Georgia Tech. I'm a grad student, first year MS, and I'm graduating soon.
Fun. Why do you care about AI in general?
I care about AI for the same reason that a lot of people care about AI. It's one of the big things right now. I would say that in particular, like in terms of this like impactfulness point, I think a lot of people who aren't in AI research kind of underestimate just how impactful AI could be. 5 years ago, people would kind of have laughed if you said that in a few years AI was going to start replacing web developers, but now it's happening, and everyone's taking that seriously. There are a few more effects right now that I think if you told people would happen in 5 years, for example, mass labor displacements in engineering and technician roles, people will still kind of like not really believe you, but I think that is definitely on the way. And so I think, honestly, I think everyone should be at least paying attention to AI research, even if they're not involved in it.
And I guess as a final follow-up to that, what do you want to achieve within that field?
That's a good question.
I mean, we always have I feel like every time I talk or hear talk with an AI researcher, it's always about, labor replacement, what AI will actually do. But they very seldomly talk about what they do within the field of AI. So I guess if you're now not in this group of people that will be replaced by AI, but will be in the group of people working on AI, what does that entail? What can you do? What can humans still do? What do you want to do? How do you want people to change?
Yeah. I'd say one of my most fundamental goals is to simply understand how deep learning actually works, just out of pure curiosity. The area of ML research I work in is robotics. So I did one paper recently where we were taking a a large pre-trained model, and we were using it to assist in controlling a robot as it was like executing tasks. And my current project is on what's called the continual learning problem, which is, you have an AI, it learns something, but then sometime later you want it to learn something else without having it forget what it learned previously. So I'd say arguably like a very fundamental question when it comes to learning. And kind of my hope is that I can push something forward that will help us both understand how deep learning works a little better and also improve its capabilities to the point where we can have these models that work more like the way humans do. So you don't have to train on like trillions and trillions of data points. As a human, you don't have to read the entire internet like 27 times to start speaking, but an AI does. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so could you explain how do you currently see that machine learning is working? And do you think that, so in 2021, I took an AI course at Stanford, and a friend of mine took a neuroscience course, and he was very interested in the overlap between neuroscience and machine learning. And for him, it was a bit harder to find those similarities. But do you think if we now move to this thing where AI doesn't have to actually scrape from the internet but learns from first principles, do you feel like neuroscience and neural networks that humans have can be more viable for machines to train?
Yeah, it's a good question. Personally, I think that there's only so much we can really take away from neuroscience without starting to just work on like recreating a human being. Because while human brains are like incredibly effective at what they do, they're also like very specialized, and they're designed by evolution. And so even though evolution is very powerful, it's arguably not necessarily the best approach when you're trying to build your own model. A lot of machine learning researchers actually try and like get as far away from the neuroscience analogies as possible. The fundamental unit that we use, it's called like an artificial neural network. A lot of people will say, no, it's not. Don't call it a neural network. Just call it an ANN, because they don't want people to like get confused. Yeah. At the same time, though, like biological analogies are really useful. There are a lot of things that the brain currently does that our models don't do. And then when someone develops a new technique, it's like, what's the most natural method to describe this technique that I came up with just because it was like a good mathematical approach? Well, actually, it's a lot like this neuroscience thing. So maybe I'll just call it a neuroscience thing. Yeah.
Good. So quickly going back to the other thing you said earlier about AI probably having a bigger impact on the labor market as a lot of people think. I think the skepticism that I have towards that is on the one hand because I see what technologies are currently available and how slow a lot of corporations are to implement those. But on the other hand, often when I get sent one of these reels about AI will replace everyone by one of my friends or my dad, it is always like edited in a way that makes it seem very like conspiracy theory, or at least it tries to convince you of the truth so much that I'm more skeptical. So how does that look like in your opinion? How does the impact on the labor market actually look like from a very stoic point of view?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to start out and like give some context, I think that a lot of these claims that you mentioned are like over dramatized, and that like if you've ever heard of AI like 2027, it's like this whole thing about how like, oh, we'll get like an AI that's like 2% better than the typical AI researcher, and then it'll work twice as fast and get an AI that's 4%, and then that'll get one that's 8%, and you just get this exponential growth curve, and it happens within like 2 years within these stories. So I think there's a lot of like scare tactics to like get people to pay more attention to it. At the same time, though, I think there is some realism in some of these claims, in that it is really just a matter of time, because once you get something that is even near human level of intelligence, you can build pretty quickly. The real problem is that web development and other engineering tasks that these agents are already good at are really challenging tasks. So there's like no convincing reason that an AI should be able to do these things, but should not be able to do, engineering tasks. So that it's really hard to come up with an area in which a human in the long term, should be able to perform better at if anyone in the AI industry is focusing on building an AI that is good at that specific task. I mean, we've automated away certain coding jobs first because that's what we know. Like, as the AI researchers, we know how to code. Teaching it how to code is easy.
So one argument I've heard is that the reason why the computer science, or like especially the coding industry, is under attack first is because there's not a lot of like, it's already like a fully digital process, right? It is pretty easy to have a computer system and just tell it to produce code, right? On the other hand, if it's like a manual labor, then you have to leave the purely digital world. So as you mentioned, you're also in robotics. How do AI applications in robotics look like, and where do you think that the biggest bottlenecks are?
I would say, so AI in robotics right now, if you like look up some real papers, you'll get some mixed signals, because it'll be doing some really complicated stuff like folding laundry. But like a lot of our agents are like really highly specific right now. Where like if I get my laundry folding robot, like maybe you can instruct it with like text instructions. You can say fold the laundry this way and like do this and this. But then you give it another task, and because it's a laundry folding robot, you'll say pick up the apple, and it'll start trying to fold the apple. So it's not perfect, and so that's, I would say, comforting. On the other hand, there are a lot of problems right now in the robotic space that are arguably just like a matter of scale. So you'll get like cutting edge research papers, and academics only have so much compute. And so they'll say like, oh, we trained this technique, and this robot can receive instructions in any language. It can like do any task, it can do any environment, but only from like this specific subset of like, 100 environments and 100 tasks that we had access to. Kind of the idea right now is that if someone got those exact same methods and just like worked really hard on scaling and got like 1 million tasks and like 1 million environments, you could just have a robot that generalizes in the same way ChatGPT does. ChatGPT can answer really any question, and it can apply itself to really any coding challenge because it's seen just so many different examples. There's really nothing technically different holding us back in robotics right now other than scale. It's a little bit harder to get like an example of a robot performing a task than it is to get like some text sample from the internet.
I mean, I've heard some reports of how also like in a lot of Asian countries, they record almost every task. Like in a lot of companies, they record every task workers are doing to try to train those models. Do you think that the way, do you think that okay, let's put it this way. Do you think it's harder to get the data on how humans perform the task, or to translate those behaviors and movements into a mechanical system that is also like massively and widely reproducible? So obviously some companies like Boston Dynamics have like very intricate robots that can jump and do backflips, and I often get sent those videos and I feel like, oh, well, people think that's very scary. But then again, how do you think, sorry, not how do you think, but I feel like we need to have like a certain trade-off between, how like deeply mechanical can this machine be, and it also being available at a price that makes sense to actually replace the humans with.
Interesting. So you're asking like, which is harder, like mass producing a robot that's actually capable of performing useful tasks, or like getting the robot to be smart enough to like perform those tasks? Honestly, I'm not engaged enough in the mechanical space to really understand the major trade-offs there. Because usually, we have some like cut and paste robot that every lab has, and we just use it. But I would say that there are a lot of tasks that like, even if you have to drop 10 grand on like a really stable and like reliable robotic arm, there are a lot of tasks that could justify that price. Like if you, for example, like a really simple one, maybe even from a consumer level, could be like a chef robot, right? So you get 2 arms, and it's like picking up potatoes, chopping them up, making dishes and stuff. I think that could be insanely cool and very useful.
How does the lab environment at Georgia Tech look like in the AA research space?
It's basically just an office in terms of like what it literally looks like. It is basically just an office. We're actually there right now. There's lots of like open desks so that you can collaborate with people around you. But because we keep all of our, our servers in a different room, and we access it remotely, like all you really need is like a chair and a table to do AI research. But in we have another location where we actually have the robots, and that one is maybe a little more interesting because you have like 3 different teams will have their robots. We've got like a robotic arm that can manipulate and pick up objects. Someone else had like a car with like spikes attached to the wheels so that they could like climb up a wall. Yeah.
So how accessible do you currently consider AI research to be? And one argument that I think has been made for LLMs is that a lot of people that maybe don't have the coding background can now engage in stuff like website building, etc. Right? So you've also mentioned at some point that the AI research space is very, very competitive. And so how accessible is it to somebody who maybe thinks, okay, my job might be left behind by AI, I won't be able to do my manual practice, but if I can actually go work on AI, how accessible is it?
It's very competitive, yeah. I came in freshman year at Georgia Tech, and I decided that I was interested in AI research. And so I applied to probably like 24 different professors. None of them even responded to me as a freshman. So I eventually started working with a theory professor who was much more receptive. And then I published a paper with him. And only after doing that was I able to get into an AI lab. So I had to start researching before I could research. And it just keeps going. Like the PhD programs are incredibly competitive. You really need to have like a perfect GPA and multiple publications at like top tier conferences in order to get to like a top 20 school.
What do you mean by publication at a conference?
It's like a paper. Like AI researchers, rather than publishing in journals, we tend to publish in conferences because it's faster. So like as a undergrad, like hoping to get into a PhD program, you would need to like work on multiple papers and like basically be the first author, meaning like you were the most impactful person on the project.
So how does the peer review process look like for a conference versus a journal?
I haven't submitted to a journal, but I imagine they're pretty similar. My sister works in biochemistry, and so she submits to journals, and we talked about the review process at one point. It was basically identical, but it's just you put in your paper, there's an agreement. It's like, all right, 3 people will review your paper, so you'll review 3 other people's papers. There's a rebuttal period where maybe someone says like, oh, like I didn't like your paper for this reason, and you can be like, oh, well, you missed this thing in the appendix, or they can even tell you like, I like your paper, but I want you to run this additional experiment, and then you run it. And then from there, if things are good and your paper is competitive, then you can get into a conference.
So what makes the publishing process faster compared to a journal?
The idea is that I believe that the journal comes out much later. So the conference, you submit, your stuff gets reviewed, and then like within like 2 or 3 months, you can be at the conference presenting on the work, talking with other researchers. And for AI, that's really important because it moves really, really fast. Whereas like in math, for example, if you solve the Riemann hypothesis somehow, that's going to be really, really impactful for the next like 20 years, no matter what you do. So that one, you can afford to wait like 6 to 8 months between someone looking at the paper and it getting out to everybody.
So what is one of the more interesting papers or people been that you've met through these or read through these conferences?
One of the most interesting papers? Let's see. It's a wide range of topics to cover.
Or just any that particularly invigorated you.
Yeah, I'm really interested in discrete diffusion.
What is that?
The idea is, I'll start by explaining diffusion. Diffusion is a simple process that basically everyone's using for image generation right now, where to teach the model how to generate images, you start with some real image, maybe it's like an image of a car, and then you add random noise to it. The more random noise you add to it, the more like blurry and like distorted it gets until eventually it's just like literally random noise, just random pixel colors. And so basically what you do is you build a trajectory where you start with this random noise and you kind of work your way over less and less noise, and then you get a final image that looks like a car. And that's what you train the AI on. You give it one image in the sequence that's noisy, and you ask it to give you a less noisy image. Super, super effective. It's much, much better than techniques we were using like 5 to 10 years ago, which is why it's everywhere now. But surprisingly, we don't actually use a technique like this to generate text. When you're talking with ChatGPT, it's just it's what we call autoregressive. It's you get some number of words in a sentence, it looks at all of the previous words, and then it generates the next word. And that process is slow, and it's error prone. For example, if a diffusion model is trying to generate an image of a car, and it makes a mistake on step 1, and like gives the car like 3 headlights, it has time to like notice that that's wrong and like fix it, because maybe as it's denoising this image and it's like sharpening it, it notices like, hey, that shouldn't be a headlight. These white pixels should be red. A transformer, though, if you, ChatGPT, if you say, solve this math problem, begin by answering, like maybe I ask it like the square root of 42, and I say, write the answer first, then maybe it'll guess, it'll say the wrong number, and then it'll start reasoning, and it'll go, oh, well, you got to like follow this process and like, carry the one, blah, blah, blah. And it gets to the end and it realizes its answer was incorrect. Well, it can't go back and change that because it's already generated it.
So that's why AIs so often try to justify what they were doing and say, oh, well, you're so right if you catch them out, but never try to never appear to be very critical about what they've put out.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, there's there's a really good example I saw recently where you ask ChatGPT to name an NFL team and that doesn't end with the letter S, and it just like loses its mind, and it'll start like listing. It'll be like the Miami Dolphins. Wait, no. The Miami Dolphins. Wait, no. And it just can't go backwards and be like, wait, Miami Dolphins was incorrect, let me replace that with a different word. It'll just keep cycling and spitting out more and more text until it eventually gives up.
So since these two AI models are practically different, when you, for example, have a ChatGPT window and you first like talk to it and then you ask it to generate an image, it does use 2 different models then, right?
It does, yeah. There's been a really big emphasis recently on like what's called multimodal AI. With my ChatGPT, I can hand it an image, it can generate me an image. I can talk with it using audio, it can respond to me using audio. Like all of these different elements combined so that it's like more human-like and it can cover like any like data distribution. If you actually look under the hood at what's going on, a lot of the time you get like the core transformer-based model, which is like the main thing that can respond to you in text. And then people will just slap on like an extra model and like hook them together and maybe like train it for like a very small amount of time so that it knows how to communicate. Even in the robotics space, like maybe I have ChatGPT and I want it to like be able to control a robot. I will get ChatGPT, I will get a smaller second model that like takes ChatGPT's tokens, like its words, and turns them into actions. And I'll rely basically on the core model with this like slight like tumor attached to it.
And this humanity aspect, is that something that's just slapped on top, or is it something that can also be injected a bit early on in the training process of the model?
Yeah, what do you mean by humanity?
In terms of what you mentioned earlier about how it feels a bit more human to talk to ChatGPT, for example.
Oh yeah, than like the previous algorithms we had that were just like big if-else chains. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Fundamentally, like the core model that ChatGPT is trained on should not be human, which is I think maybe what you're getting at as well, because all it's trained to do is like regurgitate. So if I give it like a Wikipedia article, and I say like Moby Dick is and then it like recognizes through like intense training, book is the right next word. That doesn't really teach you how to like act like a human, but then the final output acts like a human. And the difference there is what we call reinforcement learning with human feedback, which is actually the same way humans are trained. Like you might have some natural capabilities at like processing words, but what makes you human is the fact that like you have different goals and desires motivated by your biology. where like if I give you like a piece of candy, your brain goes, oh, that was good. And if you trip and like break your ankle, your brain goes, oh, that was bad. By training it on reinforcement learning, that's essentially what we do. We give it this like we start by giving it this really high advantage in terms of like text processing by having it train on predicting the next token. But then we say, all right, act like a human. If you do better at it, I'll give you more reward. And if you do worse, I'll give you less reward. And that's how it learns to like behave in a way that seems more sensible to us.
So switching back again from the bit more technical side to the sociology and economics and philosophy, do you think there will be a use for most human at the end of our lifetimes? Like your lifetime specifically, whenever you will perish in like 21 something.
Yeah, I hope so.
That sounds slightly concerning.
I think this could go really well or it could go really poorly. I've been thinking a lot recently about like what motivates like a strong economy and like how the world is set up. And I think fundamentally, if you want to be like a top economy, you cannot be nice, so to speak, to your citizens. Like, let's say ignoring like all of the realistic like financial feasibility questions. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the government had the money to just fully fund everyone, free healthcare for everybody, free food for everybody, free housing for everybody, you know, and like throw on top of that some extra quality of life things. People might still work to contribute to the economy, you know, just for fun. But like, if you gave that to me, for example, I would probably choose to work 6 to 8 hour days rather than like 10 to 12 hour days. And so what does that do to your economy in the long run? It will drastically reduce your economic output. So it's actually arguably in the government's best interests to kind of keep us on this like hamster treadmill where it's like you're afraid of losing your job and losing your house and, you know, losing your healthcare. So you push extra hard and you can just kind of rely on this system to keep pushing people to work in the long run. I don't know how accurate this is. I'm not an economist, but I think that is, like, from my perspective at least, that's kind of a fundamental problem when it comes to implementing like good social policy. And the hope would be kind of like in the nice world with AI, that maybe if as a human I'm no longer economically relevant because the AI can think smarter than me, it can be more creative than me, it's better at like doing manual labor once you give it access to a robot. If it's better at all of those things, maybe I don't matter as much for the economy and we can just, you know, give me universal healthcare, give me all of these nice things without destroying the overall economic output of a country.
Now I'm curious though, what would the robots do if we didn't matter? Because I feel like in any case, if we don't consume, then what should we use all the AI stuff for?
I mean, arguably we do consume, but I think I kind of get what you're getting at here, in that like if the AI is better at military and better at economy, like the humans are just kind of vestigial, right? Like why would the robot care enough to like support the human?
But I feel like kind of without the humans to support, the AI might not, at least from how I see it, might not really have a purpose. Now, of course, you could say, or at least I think you could say that the AI's purpose is whatever it was instructed to do. So if we just tell it, oh, go and explore the universe, colonize the universe, that obviously, for that, they don't need humans. But I feel like if we could insert some human supremacy into the AI world and build our AI economy on that, then the ultimate purpose of the humans, of the AI models would be to support us in whatever way they see fit. Would it not?
It would be, yeah. Which can be concerning. You know, like how can you control something that's more capable and more intelligent than you and has control of your healthcare and your military? It's a very difficult problem, which is why I think most people, when they talk about the future of AI, do not talk about this kind of utopian view where like maybe we just instruct it and we don't have to work and it does all of the hard stuff for us. Most people are more concerned about like, okay, like once you give something that level of control, you mess up even a little, and like it gets just a little bit of its own free will and it has no reason to keep you around. For the same reason we don't particularly care when, you know, we have to pave over an anthill to build a road. It's like if it gets in the way, like, you know, it's a lesser form of life, like whatever.
I mean, I think there's definitely also some kind of fear there that if you say, oh, well, serve me, but have a greater intelligence than me, then it might become paternalistic and have a different view of what's good for us than we might do ourselves. So do you think there's some sensible limit to put on AI capabilities? And how would that affect your research? And how would that go against your, no, I want this to, you know, I want to create something that's so powerful, but I also have this obligation to not trump humans in a way?
Yeah. It's a complicated question. And honestly, I haven't figured out fully like how I feel about that state. You know, like technically pushing forward AI could create, you know, something very dangerous. I think that at the level I'm working at least, I will not be the one directly causing that. I hope not. So I think I can't afford to somewhat push it off. Sorry, can you remind me of what the rest of the question was?
The rest of the question, wait, let me think. I'm blanking.
It's all good.
That happens. But the next question I've written down. So as we've kind of talked about at some point, I feel like there's, you know, there are the people working on AI research, there are the people that do very valuable work, like hopefully you, right? And then there are the people that will be replaced by AI. Do you think that there's a big gap between these two people groups?
What kind of gap?
In terms of like, no, it is. We can very clearly say these people have a use and these people do not.
Well, I want to start out by saying that all people have a use. All people are valuable.
I think that, like, I think we need to. I will ground this question in human supremacy or like a general appreciation for human life. But in terms of just solely for increasing scientific or economic output.
Okay, yeah. I mean, we're at a stage right now where any human really, like who has like above like the median or maybe even like the lower quartile of capability is like going to be incredibly valuable, like at least economically, because while AI is like pretty smart, it's not quite there enough to the point where it can do all things. Like there are certainly many tasks that the human right now can do better than the AI. I guess the reason to be concerned is that there are some tasks which we thought the human would always be better than the AI at, that they no longer are, and that we expect that many of these tasks that currently exist will soon no longer exist for humans.
So previously you mentioned how competitive the AI space is. Now we also face competition for other jobs, not just from other workers, but also from AI itself. So I guess, especially in this like top field of people that might be extremely useful to economic and scientific development, even in the age of AI, do you think they're driven more by fear and pressure, like pressure to publish, pressure to get into these journals, or through scientific inquiry?
Yeah, it's a complicated one. Honestly, this might be a hot take, but I think it's mostly pressure to publish. I know a lot of PhD students who work incredibly hard. Like I know this one guy who I swear he has no downtime. Like I was working on a paper with him, and I got a text from him at like 1 a.m., like 3 a.m., 5 a.m., 7 a.m. I was like, bro, when do you sleep? Like he was active during the day too.
Some people are just differently clocked.
Yeah.
So I guess what do you think are the consequences of this?
I think there's consequences for academia, maybe not as much for like the rest of the world, because I think a lot of I think this publish or perish mentality ends up leading to a lot of papers that are maybe like lower quality, because like I think there is like a big mentality among researchers, at least the ones I know, that like, oh, I haven't published in like 4 months, like I gotta do something, or like maybe you have a project that's not doing too well, but kind of the mentality is, I've put so much time and effort into this project, it must succeed. And it's like, if what you're trying to do is you're trying to show an effect for other researchers so that they can build their research off of that, like you really would prefer if the effects you were seeing come out of other papers were like definitely real and not at all p-hacked. And I think there is some temptation to like p-hack results, even if like researchers don't admit it to themselves. Like there are certain practices maybe particularly in the robotics space, that
Do
are a
you
little
quickly want to
questionable.
explain what p-hacking is?
Oh yeah, sure, sorry. P-hacking is just this idea that whenever you're publishing a result that is malleable to probability in any way, you want to show that your result is not just random chance, and you want to show that it's what's called statistically significant. So the idea would be, maybe I'm like a medical researcher, and I want to show that like chocolate is actually good for your health. Maybe what I'd do is I'd give chocolate to like 1,000 people, and I'd measure, did their health improve with the chocolate over my control group, or did it actually go down? And if this was a real effect, you might expect that like on average, maybe like 10% of people do better. But as we know, chocolate is not actually good for your health. Eating more chocolate is probably not great for you. So on average, it'll actually do worse. The problem is that like probabilistically, there are a lot of factors that are like outside of your control. So you could end up with a study where like you just by random chance managed to pick like 100 really, really healthy guys. And it's like they, right as you start your study, they decide that they're going to go and work twice as hard at the gym. So maybe then by random chance, you could get a statistical effect that shows that chocolate is actually good for you. The scientific question is really, how do you sort these out? I'm trying to figure out the effects of chocolate. How do I account for this random noise? There are a whole set of procedures that go along with this that that design how you control like how many people you pick and like how you measure things. The problem is, as a researcher reading another paper, you don't see all of the work they did that doesn't end up succeeding. So if they are trying to, if instead of examining the effects of chocolate as their study goal, what their goal is to publish a interesting paper that will get them like some award or something, then what they could do is they could say, I'm going to study the effects of chocolate, I'm going to study the effects of ice cream, I'm going to study the effects of cake, I'm going to study the effects of pie, so on and so forth, until eventually by random chance they come to that scenario where they just got 100 really healthy guys, and then they can say, look, cake is healthy for you.
Have you ever seen this like meta-study p-value graph where right at the like critical value there's a massive drop-off, like in terms of p-values, that like if it's just not critical, then those studies just don't get published?
Yes. It makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah.
Right. So slightly more metaphysical. Do you think that people, especially in the upper echelon, should make the most of the talents, and why do you think don't they? This also kind of goes back to a conversation we once had about where you mentioned that you see a lot of Christians, for example, that seem to not want to push their talents to the absolute max, maybe because for other reasons, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that kind of like the simplest way of putting this idea that we talked about is that when you get up into like the upper echelons of competition, like really competitive, like maybe top research roles at a top company, coming from a top university, right? Like you have these multiplicative factors where you have like the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. After a certain point, what you're doing is you're selecting for people who are invested in the competition. And I guess kind of the core problem is that I think that perhaps being so invested in competition is not the best mindset. It's perhaps not the ideal mindset we want people in these competitive positions to have, particularly positions of power, right? Like if you have to be the most competitive 1% of the 1% to get like a political office, then, I mean, really what that says about you is that, you had the option to prioritize your family. You had the option to prioritize like maybe doing positive impact and like volunteer service. But ultimately what your career says about you is that you prioritized competing. So I guess to put this in my own personal experience, I've known like a lot of like really good, ethical people who I really like working with over the years, but a lot of them have not really pushed themselves as far into like, going to a top university, getting a top AI research role, stuff like that. And I talk to them, I'm like, why are you doing this? And the answer is generally because like, that's not what gives life meaning. Like what gives life meaning is having positive impact on my local community, settling down and starting a family. which I think is respectable.
Mm-hmm.
It's a respectable view to hold, but it does unfortunately lead to this kind of crisis where at least in my worldview, I think a lot of the people in power maybe do not have the best motivations and do not have the best, maybe the best outlook for the people who are putting them in those positions of power.
Mm-hmm. Before going on to the next question, could you very briefly check the time? Because I know you need to fly out at some point.
Oh, yes. That's only 11:30.
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
we got time.
Okay, so about these people in power, do you think is there any way to, in general, maybe not limit competition, but okay, so for example, at Georgia Tech, I feel like a lot of classes have a sort of like engineering ethics requirement sort of shoved in. First of all, what do you make of those? Because like, in my opinion, they often are more like a checkbox to say, okay, we've thought about it, right? Without actually like changing people and getting them to think. So what do you make of those, and how do you think we could more easily implement them? And how do you in your life now say, although I want to be highly competitive, what is like your way to sort of also still be ethical and be human and connected to people?
Yeah, a great set of questions. First of all, you asked, like, what do I think of the Georgia Tech ethics requirement? I agree. I think it is kind of superfluous. I think there were actually people in my ethics class who took it very seriously. Mm-hmm. I think they were also the kind of people who really didn't need an ethics class. The kind of people who were like, yes, like, I know Kant already. Let me tell you about Kantian ethics. And I don't think that very many people were changed much by the ethics course. Mm-hmm. I think, unfortunately, the only way to really control something like that is kind of, it requires like a lot of overhauling of the university structure and like how students are let in and what they're required to do to graduate. For example, like something that you could do that would like be a really impactful requirement is you could require people to volunteer at specific programs that you know will be impactful, mm-hmm. give them an exposure to like, maybe aiding the homeless population in Atlanta. Of course, there will be people who find their way around that, but the overall point would be it's hard to beat ethical experience. I can tell you, hey, be ethical, but it really is quite different to be like, if you want to graduate, you must show me you are ethical, mm-hmm.
That's pretty funny because I kind of got around an ethical requirement, so to say, because in Austria, I'm from Austria, and in Austria, you either have to do mandatory military service for 6 months or work in a social sector for 9 months. And the job conditions are usually not so good and the pay is very poor. And a lot of people I know really do not like this. So they, especially if they go to the military, they just feel like they're kind of wasting their 1 year of one of the best years of their life away. And to be fair, I'm a deacon, so I got out of the requirement. And I know that's a bit cheeky and whatnot. But I think it's still a good system in general, which is of course posh for me to say since I didn't serve it, right? For example, I had actually one friend who did the military thing, and for the military he learned to be a paramedic, and another friend worked for the Red Cross in their emergency services. So they were actually stationed together because through his paramedic part-time as a paramedic, he also briefly was served for the Red Cross there, and actually joined them on one of their night shifts. Because at least in Austria, you can, a lot of the paramedics are just sort of paramedics in training. So we were, and I joined them for a night, which you can do to like test it out if that's something you might want to pick up in your free time as a volunteer service. And I have to say that was rather impactful. I mean, like, I'm not going to go through the entire story because I think I've told you the story before.
You have, yeah. But if you want it on camera, like, I don't mind hearing it.
Yeah, no, but no, it's just I think it's a bit too long for this. But I'd like gladly tell 1081 in private. But basically, 3 things I saw. I saw one person who had like lived under really, really poor living conditions and had like some kind of disease that stripped away all of her muscle mass, and she was just like in constant misery to a point where I would not judge a person for ending their life, because Then I saw another person who, then the second emergency that was on was just a person who had some diabetical and heart issues, but that was also kind of cool because we got to use the sirens and we had our lights on and everything, so it was just exciting. And then on the last emergency we got was a person who tried to kill herself after 20 years of being an alcoholic, and apparently she's not tried to kill herself for the first time. So it was basically, I was really tired entering a home at 3 a.m. with a person where they're intoxicated and just tried to off themselves with a knife. Maybe they tried to off someone else too, right? Which was interesting because they didn't even send the police. It was just like the three of us. And so on the one hand, I think it's extremely cool that I got this experience. On the other hand, I feel like if my wife ever tries to kill herself and they send 3 20-year-olds, 2 of them sort of trained, 1 of them no training at all to try to fix her up. There
are trade-offs for sure.
But I think in general it was a good experience, and I think also like through church and through like what I've done in church, I haven't done a lot, but like I've visited a lot of families with my dad because my dad is also a priest, and so I saw a lot of different living conditions, and that definitely helped. So I do agree that some kind of social service might be a lot more practical than studying a different philosopher's class. So wait, there was one more point I had about that. No, I did not. Did you have a point?
I remember you asked me a whole chain of questions. I don't think I remember all of them.
I guess. Oh well, right. I think the second one was, or the third one was, how do you yourself try to be ethical in your pursuits, given how competitive you are?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think sometimes you have to take an L, like in your career or like in some metric you care about in order to be an ethical person. Mm-hmm. Like a really like a simple example is, like if you have friends, like those friends are going to have rough times. They're going to need support. And if you are trying to be a really like competitive person and like push yourself up to like the highest job, the highest level imaginable or whatever, you're going to have deadlines all the time. So the question is like, if you have a friend who is struggling and who needs you as a friend to be there for them and a deadline at the same time, which one do you choose? Mm-hmm. I think to be an ethical person, you have to choose your friend. Mm-hmm. And to be a competitive person, you have to, despite that, you have to find a way to make it up later. Mm-hmm. So you have to work harder in order to maintain some sense of being ethical. Mm-hmm.
Which of the two do you think gives you more satisfaction in life? The reason why I'm asking is, on the one hand, I feel like when I take some time out to help a friend because he's going through a bad situation, that gives me like more motivation, more purpose, and I feel more useful for society. And then I also feel like that sometimes helps me to push more to still get all of my other obligations done on my professional side. But on the other hand, because of that, I've kind of developed a bit of a savior complex when I was younger. And I really always wanted to not aggressively help people, but definitely help people. And then I had some relationships with people who were over a long term, consistently very depressed, you would say, right?
Yeah.
Depressed, suicidal, the entire range of things, right? And on the one hand, I always had this feeling of, well, no, I now have to be there for them. But on the other hand, I also feel like this kind of gets hijacked into me spending my time on helping them because I feel good about helping them without actually realizing that I'm just sustaining the problem without actually giving them real answers, like pushing them to therapy, because I feel like, oh, I'm so great, I can just fix them myself. So in that light, how do you value your competitive side and your more caring side, and how much satisfaction you get out of those?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think savior complexes are definitely a thing to be worried about, because it is very easy to go too far into the, am I doing what's best for this person, or am I doing what makes me feel best? Because I agree with you. I think it does feel really good to help the people around you. Mm-hmm. I guess kind of my take on this is recently I learned that you just need hard boundaries, where there's a stark difference between, as your friend, I'll be there for you when you need it, and literally carrying a person on your back everywhere you go. Mm-hmm. I think you can give a friend advice, but you should not be their therapist, because mm-hmm. therapists exist for a reason. Yeah.
Fair. One more thought I had back, if we now go back to this thing of you know, there are people that are more valuable and more people that are less valuable. What happens to the people that are less valuable? So, in the philosophical space, you know JRAG, right?
Yes.
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 Actually, I think the first time I met Gryphon, I told him that he looks like an attractive version of JRAG. But anyhow, that was an interesting night. But so one concept he uses to discuss this is biodiesel, because he says, you know, the way that the economy is currently run, it feels like the end goal for the people that are not so valuable is to turn them into biodiesel, which is obviously this like
Wild,
this wildly extreme, very unrealistic thought, but it still kind of like tries to highlight the disregard or like the lack of strategy that we currently have for them, right? And obviously some industries will always be human, right? But we can't turn any human that is not as valuable intellectually into a masseur, a prostitute or whatnot, right? For something that we would require the humanness for. Now then there's this idea of, well, if we just have like infinite value through AIs, which I think is kind of reflected in how some of the AI companies are valued on the stock market. If we have that and we could like nationalize them in some way, and then we could just have like UBI and luxury space gay communism for everyone, which is also a term which I do not know if it's too correct anymore, but it appeared in the meme space at some point. So if we now have all of these different ideas of what we could do to people that might not really have a purpose, once again, always going to the savior complex, should we alleviate them of all their needs? What happens to them from an evolutionary standpoint? How paternalistic can we be? I know this is a huge range of questions, so just give me your thoughts on any of those.
Yeah. I think ultimately, yeah, we should try and alleviate people of their needs. Like, I think once we have the capability to completely disconnect people from the kind of the forces of life, we should do so. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can argue back and forth like right now about whether we already have that capability, which I think is oftentimes what like socialists and capitalists get into fights over. Mm-hmm. But once we have an AI system online that can do everything you can do but better, it's almost certainly to the point where the human is no longer really a valuable part of the economic system, and we can afford to disconnect them and, you know, like I guess as you said, paternalize them. I think, and I think ultimately that should be our goal as a species, is to create a system where we're no longer subject to evolution. Mm-hmm. I can't remember who said it, but I heard at one point someone said kind of like ironically that the ultimate goal of humanity is to recreate mom.
Wait, to recreate what?
Mom.
Like, oh, just, yeah.
Yeah, for everybody. Like, folds your laundry, tells you what you can eat and cannot eat, like, you know, makes sure you go to sleep on time, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I think it's funny to think about things that way, but I think in some respect it's accurate in that, like, if you could have a system that, like, doesn't let you take drugs, you know, doesn't give you the power to, like, hurt yourself in any way, like, I think a lot of people would choose that.
Mm-hmm. So I have two thoughts. On the one hand, this kind of feels like, in the biblical narrative, humanity before the fall.
Yeah.
And the statement, a good mother necessarily fails. So don't you think that life might be a bit meaningless if we are alleviated of all of those? Because I think what makes humanity, like the biblical narrative, interesting is that I feel like if everything is perfect, everything is awesome, as it says in the Lego movie, then we don't really have anything to we don't have a way to appreciate it really, because at least I think a lot of people see their wealth relatively to what they've experienced in the past. And so in the biblical narrative, there still is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? This potential threat, this potential something that kind of makes everything else meaningful. So, yeah. How do we deal with meaninglessness if everything is alleviated?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'm no expert, but I think that the natural way would be to find meaning in the things that you do have control over without being subject to kind of like the harsh reality of life as we have right now. Mm-hmm. It's like, for example, like maybe in this like theoretical AI utopia, which will probably never happen, mm-hmm. but for the sake of argument, let's say it does, maybe all of your like life stuff is taken care of. You have a house, you have health insurance, yada yada yada. Maybe you choose to focus on curiosity. Maybe like the AI is thinking 10,000 times faster than you, but so it's probably going to always be a better scientist. But maybe you just want to understand stuff, so you learn anyways. And then one day, you know, like we figure out through, you know, a routine screening that you have cancer. It's like the government, like the system should come in when it comes to cancer, right? It's like that's a level of harm that I think as a society we should strive to protect you from. But we shouldn't be so controlling that you just can't choose to do anything and you literally must like sit in a glass box all day, making sure nothing can like touch you.
Yeah, basically the Matrix in some ways.
Exactly, yeah. Matrix is too far.
Wait, I have one more follow-up thought on that. What was it? So one thing that I like where I think we have kind of like different systems, because like in this like the AI problem we're trying to solve, I feel like it's a very like, how do we get the optimal solution for acquiring capital, like getting systems to people, etc. And I feel like that this kind of like professional thing very much different, like is different from my hobbies, for example. Like I recently got into music production and I suck. I am very bad at making a good song that would serve a lot of people, but I'm having such a good time. Like I'm really having the time of my life making music that maybe at some point will be successful, right? But it doesn't have the end goal of being successful. So do you think that humanity will be less focused on producing something that the market wants, producing something that has to be subject to economic viability, but more just to fulfill themselves?
Exactly, yeah. I think well put. That's exactly what I think. Like I think you should be allowed to like pursue music if that's what you're interested in, without being subject to like, well, if I don't get this to take off in the next 6 months, I'll lose my house.
Yeah.
So, but you said we disagree, so I'm curious. Like, what am I missing?
Wait, we disagree on what?
You said like we think about it.
Oh no! I think those are just different systems in terms of like we have a like that is not like the same approach you would have to your job, for example, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I guess one follow up I had to that is like I'm currently in a biology class. I haven't been in a biology class forever, since the high school that I went to CS focus and didn't have any of that. Having no natural selection can obviously lead to some not so optimal outcomes. But then I also had this thought of, what if we just kind of like gene edit our ways out of all of these like issues that might arise? But I think on this subject, I am still like so unknowledgeable to really think of, well, what now happens to humans? How do they, like, it is almost like a new life form, because the primary, like, I guess, what is the function? The reward function is just different, right? The reward function has been deactivated, replaced by something greater, perhaps.
Yeah, greater or perhaps less predictable.
That's fair. I guess then two final questions I have is, first of all, if we now speak of AI alleviating needs, what do you think is the first need that AI will alleviate? What can we look forward to not having to worry about at the end of our lifespans thanks to AI?
Good question. I'm not sure if there will be a first one. I mean, to be honest, what I think is most likely is that the government does not handle this well. And you get a few mega corporations that have slowly absorbed more and more sectors of the economy until we have like just a tremendously huge problem. Yeah. I guess like clearly coding is on the way out, just like which kind of makes sense, because as a web dev, like I've built several websites and apps over the years. I think we have created a lot of problems for ourselves to maintain our job security. HTML, CSS, all these languages we use, they're not easy to use, and they're not easy to use for a reason. It's because if they were easier to use, there would be a lot less web dev jobs. That one's on its way out. Possibly truck driving. I'm a little wary of saying that because I feel like people have been saying, oh, truck driving is going to be automated so soon for like years and years, and now we're seeing other things go on the way out first. So I don't know about that one. But it seems with Waymo's, patrolling Atlanta streets, it seems more and more reasonable every day.
Yeah, no, that's something I feel like of all the things that we were promised to when we were children, AI will solve this and that, and we were always waiting, where are those, promises that we got through AI? And I think automated like taxis like Waymo's are like I think the first real manifestation besides LLMs, of course, where I feel like, oh, what science fiction promised to me is actually kind of here. Because I think LLMs, especially their severity, were not really predicted by science fiction. Obviously, there were a lot. You always had AI assistants, but you never had them on this kind of scope. Right?
Yeah. Growing up, if I read a sci-fi book that was supposed to be set in 2026 and they had like ChatGPT, I would be like, this is wildly unrealistic. Come on.
So I guess as a closing question, what do you think has been your favorite human experience?
Favorite human experience?
And feel free to ponder on this for a bit if you need to.
Sounds good. Yeah, there are a lot of options. I can't think of anything like super specific, but I think one of my favorite experiences is just being able to like go outside and sit under a tree in a park while it's raining. Just smell the fresh air. You know how like air smells different like when it's raining?
How intensive should the rain be?
How intense should it be? Like a light rain. Like I don't want to be like soaked even under the tree, But
I feel like when it's summer and like it's not too cold in the rain, it's not windy. I hate rain and wind in combination. I think either kind of works, but rain and wind is a miserable experience. But a light drizzle, it's just kind of like you feel kind of like cradled by the earth in a sense.
Yeah, exactly.
That was such a nice point to end. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope to have even more of these conversations in the future. If you want to be in, let us know. I forgot what I say in the end. Well, Gryphon, so much for your time. Have fun on your flight. And
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you for having me.